All right, I wanted to go over while we are progressing along the next assignment, which is going to be after the 3D printing one that you're also working on, is that mechanical arm. So I'm not going to go over every single step of something like this. I'm going to go over the concepts that you would apply to it. So this is a robotic kind of character I'm working on. So that's where this is going to eventually go, is to something bigger, or could be something bigger. So the way I like to start off this one is by basically creating just some basic lighting in the scene, because that will help us kind of set up our stuff. If I do a render, obviously it becomes a black area, so I'm going to add in a sky dome so that I get some coloring in there. And then I'm also going to add in an area light, so I will also see some of the stuff. Now that's going to be difficult to see without any actual items in the scene, so for now I'm just going to throw in a sphere just so I have something inside the scene. Okay, so imagine your Pokeball type thing just having some sort of lighting set up. And as you start progressing into your 3D modeling, you can really start creating a lot of these libraries. Like Nuke, you could have a Nuke library where if you have a consistent setup of, I'm going to be rendering out stuff for glows, I can have a file that is just that kind of setup. I can have another one that's just straightforward. Here's ambient occlusion, here's Z depth, and then that's out. You may have other ones that you also use, okay? Any of the big houses that are out there, they have basically what are called pipelines, where it's just like you open up a file in Nuke, you load in your files, and it automatically populates the rest of it, okay? So I think that is probably sufficient enough. Once I throw on a Arnold shader, and then let me tone down that background light just a bit. It's a bit too bright for me. That's pretty good. And then I'll take my main light and crank this up a lot. That's too much. All right, that's good there. Okay, so just something so that I have some coloration in here. If you don't want to see the background, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, you can select it, and in the attribute editor you can actually turn that off. That way your item is a little bit more visible in the scene, as opposed to this where it kind of gets washed out. Or you may want to find a medium ground that you work with. Okay, I'd like to have it about here. Then my light's good. So I'm going to leave these as they are and just kind of throw them onto a layer, and then call these background items. And then just hit the, not template because it goes black, but hit reference. And then I can't select them, but they're still in the scene, okay? All right, so now that I have just a basic setup, I can close that, and then I can start modeling stuff. The biggest thing with this one is, because it's a mechanical arm, you have to think about how things are going to move on this mechanical arm. It's not simply a matter of building, let's say, a cylinder, because if this is a mechanical device, this thing can't bend and squish and whatever else. It has to have some way for it to bend and squish and whatever. I clicked something here. Where did I click that? All right. So let's say that I'm going to start off with this arm. So I'm going to start off at the top of it, and it helps to keep everything kind of centered. So I'm either going to keep it centered this way here, or I'm going to keep it centered that way, or I'm going to keep it centered this way. Either way I go, I want to make sure that one of those directions is always the same. I'm not going to try to model this at some funky angle. It'll just make things more difficult. So I'm going to go this way with it. So the first thing I like to do is just block out the shapes. That will really help you get proportions right, because you can spend a lot of time modeling just one portion of the arm and then really lose it because the proportions are way off because you didn't spend enough time working with it. So I just want to get some basic shapes into here. So there's my bicep area. Here is my forearm area. That looks wonderful. There we go. For the hand, oops, let's scoot this down. That's sufficiently hand and arm here. Okay, so that's as far as you really need to go with kind of a blocking in stage. But again, you'll kind of see things. If this is too chunky, then that's going to look really odd when I go in to do the forearm also that chunky. Again, some robots have these kinds of things, but I'm going to go with something like that. Okay. So I'm going to take these pieces again, I'm going to throw them onto a layer, I'm going to template it, and just call this ref for reference. Okay. Yeah, you can kind of see them there. Let me give this a color. Nope, that didn't help at all. There you go. Now you can see it. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to start building my shape. The thing with anything mechanical or anything hard surface is getting it to look like it's made out of sheet metal. And something that's made out of sheet metal is typically not going to be very like rounded and fluid and whatever else. There may be some round parts, or maybe some sharp parts or fluid parts, but for the overall metalness of it, it has to have sharp areas and some smooth areas. So with this, I'm going to create a cube. You could also probably start off with a cylinder. I'm going to place it about where that's at. And I'm going to try to go into the mechanics of how this would actually connect to the arm. So if it helps, look up bone, muscle, arm. And this will give you an idea, at least, of how these things function. So at the shoulder area, you have all these muscles that are wrapped around your shoulder. There's essentially a ball joint that's at the center of this that allows you to move left and right and up and down and whatever else, okay? At the elbow, it's a hinge joint. So even though I can do this, that is not my elbow joint spinning at all. That is just the two bones in there actually like spinning around each other, okay? So when I do the elbow area, I'm going to use a hinge joint that allows me to basically just make a hinge for that. And then at the wrist area, I can do another ball joint there. And that should give me enough mobility that if I wanted to animate this, the hand can turn around, it can bend, and then it can come up and down. So those are the things. Also on the fingers, each one of your finger joints, even though you could probably twist your fingers a little bit, you typically on a robot wouldn't do that, right? So most of your finger joints are going to rotate just like this, just like hinge joints right here and hinge joints right there, with the exception of this base one that would be a hinge joint this way and kind of like a side to side as well, okay? I would actually just do hinges for each one of those areas and then worry about the stretching this somewhere else, okay? So definitely look at this kind of stuff so you can actually understand it if you don't understand it. So with the shoulder, I'm going to create some sort of shoulder device here. So I'm going to go into my edge loops, and I'm just going to start to block some stuff out. Oh, I have my symmetry on. Let me turn my symmetry off. There we go. All right, so I just deleted that area because, again, this is going to be a ball joint. So I'm going to create a sphere and kind of block this in. And depending on how big my robot character would be obviously how big this ball joint is. Maybe something like that would be sufficient. Okay, and what that does, it gives me a couple things. One of them I can use as a reference, right? So I can just use this as where these points should come up to, where these points will maybe come out to, so maybe I'll scale these out. Where these points will also come out to. And then I'm going to add in another edge loop, let's say about in the middle here. Maybe just pull that up a little bit. And what I'm doing is just kind of going through and just making sure that it looks like it actually could like sit around this. All right, and even these corners here, I'm going to take these and like push them down and then scale them in and maybe push them in a little bit. Okay, now eventually this will be smoothed out, so I'm going to hit 3. Now that's not what the piece of metal would probably look like for this, because it's way too like rounded and smooth for this to be like really mechanical-esque robot. Let me take these points here and bring them in, bring them in. Yours is going to look different, so you're not going to be copying mine. So you will find out, what yours looks like. The concepts are the same. Where you need hard edges, you'll insert edge loops or bevels. So now I have a hard edge right there. Where you want smoothness, you will have less divisions. And in some spots, you may want to have like little creases or crimps or whatever else to make it look like more of a robot. So as I hit 3 here, you can see how smooth that arm shape is going into that. Okay? Just to test this out, I'm going to parent this forearm to the shoulder, or the bicep to the shoulder. And if I just take that and rotate it, that's how that arm would rotate, like that, and then like that. Okay, and obviously it could go in any direction. Just undid it so I can see that. I need to move these points down in the inside. Those are like way too high up on the inside. And again, I'm just kind of looking at what that shape's going to look like. So that matches that pretty good. All right, so now let's say that I wanted to have an area here where it wasn't perfectly smooth, because right now I have the general gist of that shape. I want to create basically like a pinch. Maybe there's 2 pieces of metal kind of fused together. Maybe it's just a tight corner. So I'm going to do that. Let's say I make a little bicep and it has that in there. So I'm going to go to my insert edge loops and go here and go there and maybe flip this around. Okay, it's also important too to have stuff like the shoulder, because it really kind of sets your eye as to what is the front and what is the back. If this is a bicep, my bicep is facing pretty much the front view right now. Regardless of how my hand turns, my arm is facing, my bicep's facing the front. So I wouldn't want the bicep to be like on the inside, because that's like an awkward pose for my shoulder. I definitely wouldn't want it to be on the back. So something like this, I may grab these faces here, extrude them, give them a little bit of offset, and then maybe extrude it again, and then just kind of pull it out and then just give it, some shape like this. So now if I were to hit 3, now you can see how it looks like I have some sort of line or padding or something right in that area. Now at some point I may say, okay, well let's say this is an actual robot, or let's say this is a robot suit. If my character has something that would move under the suit, the shoulder moves, but it's not like it's bulging. When you bend your arm, your bicep typically comes up at least some. So I'm going to duplicate this just so I can show you, the purpose of doing this kind of thing. I can use this shape as 2 surfaces. So if I take one of these and I keep this, and I'm going to use Shift greater than to grab that, and then I'm going to hold Shift and marquee it and delete the rest of it. And then I'll do the same thing on here, but I'll delete the opposite pieces. And then I can put these together. Let's just grab both of them and set their both things to 12. There we go. Okay. So now these are 2 separate pieces. They look like they're somewhat together. But then this one here could actually have maybe a different material on it. And don't be afraid, even at these early stages, to start assigning materials, because that will really help you kind of define some of these shapes better. So something like this may be like a black rubbery material, and something like this one, let's say shiny metal, maybe more like a silvery material. Okay, so now I can have this as more of like a robotic suit type thing where the character could wear that and have that be like a rubbery piece that could flex while we have this metal piece that doesn't flex, okay? So you can do stuff like that as well with this kind of setup, okay? Now I'm also can add maybe a little bit more crimping right here, a little bit more definition, just by grabbing all the way around here, like that, and then maybe adding in a little bevel. And so now we have more of this like line work going on. I don't think I like that at all. Now I get a weird like little pinch right there, so I'm going to undo that. I don't like that. I may just add an edge loop right here. And that gives me a nice little pinch in that area. Okay, and I think the back needs a little bit of addressing as well. If I'm doing something that maybe the robot has more of a human look to it, there we go. Well, so there we go. So that's what the tricep looks like when it comes in like this. Obviously that's important to know if you're going to be modeling something that looks like a tricep. So I may want to take this point up, this point up, this point up like this. Oops, I went the wrong way with that one. And it doesn't have to look, exactly like a tricep, but if I'm trying to get something that kind of resembles that, it helps to have that reference. So I'm just doing the same thing I did on the other side. Okay, and then I'll put in another edge loop, let's say there and there. Okay, so now I have these kind of mechanical welds that would be, let's say, on top of this. Okay, so I have some sharp areas, I have some smooth areas. Now, at some point, I have to figure out how this is going to then connect to the next piece, because I'm going to have some sort of hinge here, so how would it connect to this hinge? Ideally, the hinge would be a cylinder, so I would just put a cylinder here. Let's say about there, that should be good. And I'm going to start moving some of these points here just to the back of that a bit. I think this may just have to come down some. All right. So to get this to connect to the cylinder, this might be too big also. Let me shrink that. Move up some. There we go. Okay. I can decide how I want to do this. And there's no, again, one way that we could do this. Here's one way that I can do it. So I'm going to create a plane. I'm going to rotate it towards the camera. I'm going to shrink my divisions to like maybe 3. And then just delete that out. And what I'm doing here is just creating some sort of little bracket that could connect the bicep area to this. And now, even though it's flat, eventually it's not going to be flat. Eventually it'll actually have some thickness to it. But it's a lot easier to set it up as a flat piece than try to rework this into as a cube. All right, so let's say that's good, and then I'm just going to extrude this and pull that open. All right, so now I have some sort of weld or bracket that's connecting those. Now there has to be some way to connect this bracket to this. So thinking about what would move, this bracket, because of how it's set up, looks like it would probably move with the arm. So as the arm is rotating the forearm like this, that bracket is staying locked to that forearm area, okay? Or to the bicep area. So I would probably have a hole going through the center of this plane. So I'm going to go and add some divisions to this real quick. Basically, anywhere there is a hard edge, I want to add divisions. I want to add bevels. There we go. Maybe one division for now. Yes. Okay. And then I'm going to smooth it out. Oops. And then I'm going to delete, I think, this edge here going all the way around. And then I'm going to grab these two faces, one on each side, and then just do a bridge. And now I have a hole in here so that if I do smooth this out, I'll have like pretty much a perfect circle. Okay? I just need to tweak the shape of the thumb to get that perfect circle shape. The circular eyes? You could use that too. In order to do that though, I can't grab just one face. Okay, so if I grab one face and hit circular eyes, it just does that. Okay? When you use the circular eyes for bigger stuff, let me create a plane, or even a cube will work. It has to have enough divisions to do it. So if I grab all 4 of these and then do that, then it works too. Yeah, that's where I was smooth. That's why I smoothed it the first time. So if I just went here and went to, oh, you mean after I do that? Yeah. So after I do this circular eyes, let's say I delete this here just so we can see that. Oops, too much. There we go. And then let's say I delete that, and then I extrude this. Okay, so once I have this, then I would put in some bevels on these hard edges. There you go. And put a bevel on this just to get this nice and crisp. And then I would actually go ahead and hit 3 to smooth it out. And now I have a pretty much perfect circle. But in order to do that up here, it'd be a bit more work to get that done. So that's why I went the other way. Okay. Now I can still put a bevel going around this. Oops. Did something wrong there. No, I didn't. That's right. Bevel. And just how it's conditioning or conforming itself. Oh no, I do have something weird. There's a triangle right there. I'm just going to merge these vertices together, and then that should give me, there we go, a good circle. Okay. All right, so now there's a piece of metal here, and then I'm going to take another cylinder, or just use this one, and duplicate it, shrink it down, put it inside here. And it doesn't need to go all the way through, but if I see it like this, I definitely want to show that, because I may render out my arm and want to see all those little detail pieces as the arm's kind of swinging around like this. Okay, and if it's not there, it'll look weird. So I am going to leave that. I'm going to duplicate this too, and maybe just put like a little cap or something on the end of this. Something like that, but then less divisions. So I'm going to go and delete every other one of these edges. And I have to hit Control Delete or Control Backspace so that it doesn't keep the vertices there. Then I can add a little bevel. I'm going to delete that bottom face because I don't need that. And then I'm going to bevel all of these. And when I do that, that gives me this kind of like gear bracket nut bolt type of thing set up. Okay. Eventually I'll duplicate it, throw it on the other side, but I'm going to tweak it a bit first. This will probably have some sort of bevel along the edge. So that's nice and smooth. Same thing on the other side, but again, I'd probably do them both at the same time. Okay, then I would just go into the forearm and do the same thing. Create another shape and just start working out the logistics of how one piece is going to weld into the next piece. Don't make it any more complicated than it has to be. Create these basic shapes first, and then you can come back and start tweaking what these basic shapes are going to look like. That needs to be a bit shorter. This needs to rotate some like that. Okay. Now if this is connecting to this, I wouldn't do another bracket here because the bracket there wouldn't make sense, because I can't have two brackets on this thing because otherwise what's actually going to rotate. So this would be attached probably to that, so that as this forearm moves, then that's moving. Now I also have to keep in mind where this bracket comes out, that if this was to rotate, I'm just going to parent it to this gear so you can see it. As this does rotate, right about there it would stop, because this gear is hitting it right about there, this little bracket. Also, if I go up too far, it's also going to hit that. So that's stuff you have to be aware of, because at some point you may want to animate your item. And so I need to kind of get this lined up in a way so that I can use it a bit more purposefully. So I just parented it again, and now I can rotate it pretty much all the way to there before it starts intersecting stuff, because it's on the inside of this, and because it's not so thick that it would hit the bicep as it comes up. Okay, so I undid the parenting again just to kind of check out that size. So now again, I'll just go through inserting some edge loops. And maybe creating some different kinds of shapes for what this looks like. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole process of this. That's going to be where you'll end up. Now you'll do the same thing. How does this, oops, I never really attached that, did I? How does this attach to that? I'll probably go here to inserting an edge loop. Inserting an edge loop, oops, there. And then I can probably just extrude these and maybe bring them into that sphere. So it looks like, or that cylinder, so it looks like they're actually like part of the same cylinder. There you go. So I can tweak that later, obviously, but for right now it's good enough. But then I do the same thing at the bottom. How does that hand now attach to the other one? Now again, because this is something that could rotate the entire hand, I probably have some sort of ball joint there, and you may want to look at those kinds of things too. Hinge joints. Here's different hinge joints, here's how they work. Right, so something like that, that's a hinge joint. And then ball joint. here are some different ways that ball joints can work. So something like that is a ball joint. It can turn left and right. It has some ability to go this way and that way, but doesn't go too far the other ways. Right, so something like that could work. A lot of these are pretty much the same thing. And you can look at, obviously, your own stuff of how your shoulder would connect or how your wrist would connect. Or you can look up other ways that people have done this kind of thing. Okay. You can even add in like things like hydraulics. So I could add like a hydraulic thing to the side of this that would actually control more mechanically how this arm would open and close. And again, robot hydraulic arm. Well, that's a lot more involved. There we go. So something like that, obviously you can get into how the hydraulics would work on there, or something like this. You could also do several joints here, so instead of just doing one ball joint, you could have one joint that would be this kind of hinge joint this way, and another one that would rotate it around the other way. So you could do that as well, okay? So you have to use a little bit of planning to sort that out. Okay, let me save this as my new arm. I've made a project and everything else, so that's already been set up. Now, why it takes so long to do that? Basically the same kind of thing like this that's all set up. They've done a basic setup of what the arm looks like, then all this other detail has just been added on top. So once you have the basic forms, then you can start to add little attachments to it. So if you wanted to have some wires hanging down, you could just add wires hanging down. If you want a clip on there, you could just model a clip and just put it on the arm. Okay, it doesn't have to be all modeled out of the same shape. You can add stuff in afterwards. So stuff like that, definitely you could. Things like these, there's its hinge, how it has its hinge set up, and you can see how the arm kind of wraps around here. There's hydraulics on this arm, hoses. There we go. Let me throw this into my folder. Robot arm. Okay. And then just so you can see on this one, the way that I did these little blue jelly type things that would be see-through is I would model a piece. So let's say that I modeled this area. There we go. Yep, that's good. And let's say I want to have like a blue jelly thing right there. I just took a basic shape. I put it in that position. I made sure there was enough divisions in here for me to work with, so that's probably too much, maybe 6. Yeah, that's good. And then I just started grabbing some points and moving it around to fit. Now if you use B, which is soft select, and then you hold down B and middle mouse button drag, you can change that radius. It lets you softly move the stuff around. Okay, so I'm moving and scaling and tweaking and adjusting what this looks like. I could have also done this with the plane, and I wouldn't have to worry about those back faces. Okay, and eventually it'll be 3 smooth out, so maybe I want to hit 3 at this point so I can see what it's looking like. And it's just this, just a lot of patience of lining this up. Again, you don't have to have this kind of thing, but I just want to make sure you at least see how it's done. And then I can go in here and just delete all the stuff that I don't need. I don't need that. I don't need this. I don't need this. And then go back in here and just kind of tweak some more stuff. I should have deleted that before. So that's sufficient for that kind of thing. Now to get it on the other side, you can use a couple tools. Let me just isolate this. So one of them, I can just duplicate this. I can negative scale it in the probably X direction. Yeah, I didn't do a good job of doing that. Let me freeze my transforms on here. Oh, I guess because it's on a weird angle, it's going to do that. Yeah, which is fine. I'm going to go to Mesh. I'm going to say Mirror Geometry. There it is. I'm going to tell this to do it in the X direction because that's the direction it wants to go across, and it's going in the positive. So I hit Mirror. Sometimes it'll do this when you're in Isolate, so you just turn it off, turn it back on. Or make sure your settings are correct. So if I hit T, there it is, and move this over, now I can get it lined up right. There we go. So that's where that should be. So just moving that mirror, I get the exact spot of where it's lined up good. And then I can just click on it, delete the history, and then just use either Bridge or use the Append to Polygon tool to close this off. And now I would have that shape kind of sitting inside there, and then I could give that a different color. Oops. And obviously tweak if I need to tweak. Let's see, it got moved a slight bit. There we go. Okay. And then the way that I created those holes was just the same way that I showed before. Click a face on the front, click a face on the back, and then just do a bridge, and it'll create a little cavity that you could then put whatever into. Okay, or you can delete it if you just want a hole there. Make sure your surfaces have some sort of thickness to them so they look realistic. No surfaces in the real world are paper thin with the exception of obviously paper. So even these guys here, I've extruded them so that they do have a thickness right there. And the same thing here, these have thicknesses. All of my surfaces have some sort of thickness to them. Cool. All right, any questions on that stuff yet? No? As far as modeling goes, that's as far as the modeling portion is going to go. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff, just how are things connected, and then figuring that stuff out. You're going to have to use a lot of reference for how things move if you've never thought about it before. You may even want to, if you have a toy or action figure or something that's mechanical, it's just to kind of play with it to see how the pieces come together and move. Because it's very important, especially if you get into animation, of how things move, to rig them and animate them so they move correctly. Cool. So that's it for the modeling part. So.